Hey guys, this is a special interview that we're doing with Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna. You can get interviews like this every week on Crystal, Kyle, and Friends. Sign up below on Substack. Usually you will not see the full episodes here. This is a rare special occasion, but if you want to see all the episodes in their totality, sign up below. You could sign up for free and get the audio version, or you could sign up and pay $5 a month and get the video version, but please consider signing up below. That's how we support this show. I hope you enjoy a rare special interview with Congressman. Welcome, Congressman Ro Khanna. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Always great to be on. Thank you.
So let's start super basic and broad and simple. Why, in your estimation, did Kamala Harris lose the election?
We didn't have a vision of radical economic change, of sweeping economic change. I'd say it's rigged capitalism and we need progressive capitalism. You can call it whatever you want, but the reality is for the past 50 years, not just working people, but probably 60 to 70% of Americans feel like the economy hasn't worked for them. Corporations are either offshoring jobs or laying people off or making hours longer. Wages aren't going up, and places are being hollowed out. And we didn't speak to that frustration and then offer a sweeping vision of change, of addressing that. And that, to me, is the fundamental challenge for the Democratic Party. People say, like, what does the Democratic Party stand for? I think we should answer in one sentence. And tackling inequality in a modern economy. Like, that should be our mission, and that wasn't evident. I don't think Kamala Harris said the word inequality in the entire campaign.
Is there a sense within the Democratic caucus among your colleagues that something drastic needs to change? What are those conversations looking like? Because some of the public conversations are more like, let's just change how we feel about trans people, or let's just tweak some things, or, you know what, incumbent parties around the globe didn't really do that well, so there's nothing big that needs to be done here. Like, what is the level of panic within the Democratic caucus, and what are some of the prescriptions that you're hearing behind the scenes?
It's certainly more open to change than ever since I've been in Congress, and I've been in Congress now since 2017. When 2017, when Trump won, this was a fluke. This was Russian interference. This was, Hillary not going to Wisconsin. Now there's a large group of people who are saying we need a fundamental change. We need to understand why so many working class Americans have been abandoning us. There is this trend of, are we talking about trans in the right way, and what should we do in those policies? I personally don't agree with that. I think that we can very easily say that we are an inclusive party. We love and respect people of all different backgrounds and to be free and live the lives they want. If we couple that with sweeping economic change that is going to have a clear villain in terms of what people can blame, which is a rigged economic and political system, not blaming people who are immigrants and trans, the villains that Donald Trump gave them.
So how do we prevent some of your colleagues from going down a very dark and dangerous path? What I mean by that is, I've been pointing this out since the election loss, that Kamala never mentioned race, she never mentioned gender, she never mentioned trans people or pronouns or Latinx or cancel culture or political correctness. She repeatedly stressed that she'd represent all Americans when she was asked about race or gender. She ran to the right on the border. She talked about owning a gun. She talked about freedom and patriotism. How do we prevent your colleagues from looking at this landscape and taking the easy way out, which is basically, hey, we're too extreme when it comes to trans people, or we're too extreme when it comes to immigrants or whatever? Because I think that's the easy answer if you don't want to take on corporate power and you don't want to take on the big money donors, is, hey, if we just throw trans people under the bus a little more, we just throw immigrants under the bus a little more, maybe we can win with a Republican light approach. But as we've seen time and time again, that's why John Kerry lost in 2004, for example. You could argue that's why Hillary lost in 2016, for example. So how do we prevent them from going down that path and refocus? No, you actually have to take on these powerful interests, these big money donors.
Well, two things first. First, I actually think we need to wade into the cultural issues instead of not talking about them, provide an affirmative vision for our sense of America. Like, Barack Obama didn't win by not talking about race. What he said is we need to be a multiracial democracy. We're not going to win by not talking about trans rights. We got to be willing to say, like, we believe people should be able to live the life that they want, and we think inclusion is better for America. Now, we shouldn't be canceling people who disagree with us. We have to have civility. But I don't think the answer is either rejecting the vision of an inclusive America or not talking about it. Like, we need to make the affirmative case. People respond to strength. They respond to some people who have conviction. And I actually think it was a mistake for Harris to totally avoid talking about those things instead of mixing it up, going on podcasts like this and talking honestly about issues of race and gender and how people felt and what her hopeful vision was of America. That said, I don't think that's enough. Ultimately, we have to offer sweeping economic change and being willing to call certain things out. Like Larry Lessig and I have an op-ed coming out saying you shouldn't be pawns to billionaires, whether they're billionaires on our side, such as Gates and Bloomberg and Soros are pouring billions of dollars, or billionaires on their side with Elon Musk. Let's get behind a very simple thing, the main initiative that says you got to restrict contributions to super PACs. I want to get rid of super PACs, but at least restrict contributions. We need to be on the side of first saying we don't want the concentration of wealth and power. We do want to be taxing this wealth. If the guy who represents a lot of the wealth in Silicon Valley can say that, it's not a hard thing to be for. And that we're going to have a massive program of economic revival and higher wages in these places, and willing to call out a system that isn't working for many people. I think there's more openness to that than I've ever heard before. I am convinced. I know you're a Jon Stewart guy. I'm convinced if Bernie Sanders were 15 years younger, he would win the presidency in a second in 2028. Like, I have no doubt. Now, whether someone can replicate Sanders is totally, in terms of some of the issues, is totally different issue. But I think Sanders has been vindicated, and now it's for us to really fight for that agenda. I would add to it a production agenda, but there's a large part of Sanders' critique that has been vindicated.
Yeah, I think that's right. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, do you think that there's a danger, too, of Republicans overreaching on any number of issues, but to stay focused on transgender issues? I mean, they just had this really ugly spectacle of Congresswoman Nancy Mace, just viciously bullying first transgender woman member of Congress and making a big spectacle of herself. She posted literally hundreds of times on social media about this one bathroom in Capitol Hill and who is and isn't going to be allowed to use it. And I think, to me, outside of just, how voters feel on the issue, what they don't like is when it feels like powerful people are fixated on those issues versus what's going to actually impact them in their day-to-day lives.
So you're absolutely right. And they don't like bullying and they don't like hate. I mean, they have some sense of nuance. It's interesting you bring up Nancy Mace, because I was on a panel with her at Georgetown, moderated by Charlemagne the God. There was a transgender activist who got up and was protesting her, and she went on this rant saying, well, I don't want a penis in my bathroom, and just using what I thought was hateful language. And so I said, Nancy, we worked on bills together, but I just need to tell you I have a profound disagreement with your view. That she said, well, you're on the wrong side of history. Charlemagne's telling me, let's get going. This is supposed to be a tech issue, not transgender issues. I said, no, I need to say this, that we need to treat Representative McBride with dignity and respect, and that those are our values. And then my team was like, oh, I don't know if you want to post this. I was like, yes, we're going to post the clip. And she's been now going after me. But my point is, I think that's an overreach by the Republicans. People may have mixed feelings and values on trans folks playing very, very competitive sports, but there's no tolerance for just hate and bullying, in my view. And our party needs to stand for something. Even if my view is 30 to 70, people ultimately say, you know what, Ro Khanna stands for something. He stands for speaking out. And I think too often we're not willing to take clear stances.
Yeah, can I just to echo that a little bit? We just posted today, so you won't have had an opportunity to see it, but we went and interviewed some of those AOC Trump voters. They were all working class women. No bros were willing to take the call into the interview with us. But one of the things that really came out to me was that they liked just the sense that Trump on one end and AOC on the other end were fighters. You heard that from them. They were like, they mean what they say, and they're going to go out there and fight for it. And of course, as someone on the left, it drives me crazy to think that, Donald Trump is going to fight for ordinary people when there's zero record of that, quite the opposite record whatsoever. But it kind of speaks to this point that the way liberals typically think about politics of like, let me get all of the issues poll tested, let me focus group it, and if we go down the checklist and my issue set is a little more popular than their issue set, we're going to win. That's not really the way politics works. And if it was the way politics works, Kamala Harris would be waltzing easily into the White House and Democrats would be winning in like 45 out of 50 states.
Was that a waltz pun? That's pretty good. But look, I completely agree with you. And I think you have to fight, but you have to fight in what's true to who you are. There are a lot of different ways of fighting, right? There's the Donald Trump way of fighting, and then someone who I admire, AOC's way of fighting. And then there's fighting the way Gandhi fought or Nelson Mandela fought. I mean, there's quiet ways of fighting or ways of fighting that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. The question isn't how you fight or the spectacle of the fighting or what you wear, whether you wear a suit or whether you wear jeans. The question is, are you a person who takes stands? Are you a person of conviction? Are you willing to stand up for what you believe, regardless of the consequences? And I think what people loved about Bernie Sanders was that he was taking those stands for 40 years. It wasn't how he went about fighting or now I love all these pundits. Oh, you need a villain and you need a plot. And no, it's not. That's just as manufactured. What you need is clear convictions and principles in a sense of demonstrating to people that you're willing to stand on them even when it's inconvenient.
So let me ask you this question. This is, I read an article about this the other day, and I felt like a light bulb moment where I was like, oh, that actually makes perfect sense. If I had to sum up for somebody one reason why Kamala lost, the failure of the original Build Back Better bill comes to mind. So that bill had paid family leave, childcare, universal pre-K, free community college, expanding Medicare, higher minimum wage, lowered all prescription drug prices, not just some, and it expanded the child tax credit. If that bill passed, do you think the result would have been different? And also, can't we just come out and say Manchin and Sinema are directly to blame for the loss, and therefore that version and flavor of politics should be ostracized from the party?
I absolutely think if half of those things had passed, we would have won. Yeah. I've cited AMLO, who raised the minimum wage for $4.65 a day, because that's what it was in Mexico, every year to $14.50, and was one of the reasons an incumbent party won pretty decisively, with Claudia Sheinbaum succeeding him, despite COVID and all this narrative that incumbent parties were losing. But look, Kyle, you were right. We had a number of conversations at Build Back Better, and you said, I forget the number, but you said don't compromise if it goes below that. We did. We did it because of climate. But in retrospect, there were not enough immediate things in that bill. We should have gotten at least an increase in minimum wage or some paid family leave or something on childcare. And I think it is a lesson that we didn't do enough to deliver for the day-to-day economic needs of people.
Congressman, I wanted to ask you about the letter that Bernie just sent out. Control room, if we can pull up this image. I'm sure you saw this. This wasn't your typical like campaign fundraising email that went out. He asked some very serious questions about the path to move forward. And I'll just, if you'll give me a moment, I'll just read a bit of this. So he says, the American people understand our economic and political systems are rigged. They know the very rich get much richer while almost everyone else becomes poor. They know that we are moving rapidly into an oligarchic form of society. The Democrats ran a campaign protecting the status quo and tinkering around the edges. Trump and the Republicans campaigned on change and on smashing the existing order. Not surprisingly, the Republicans won. He goes on to ask, will the Democratic leadership learn the lessons of their defeat and create a party that stands with the working class and is prepared to take on the enormously powerful special interests that dominate our economy, our media, and our political life? His conclusion is that is highly unlikely. then goes on to ask a series of questions about how to build out a 50-state movement that's not politics based on the Electoral College and battleground states, how to deal with Citizens United, how to recruit more working class candidates, how to support better union organizing, and a few other questions there besides. Do you agree with his assessment, number one, that it's highly unlikely the Democratic Party is going to go in the direction that I think all three of us would like them to go in? And do you have a sense of what Senator Sanders has planned here on the heels of this email?
No, I don't think it's highly unlikely, because I believe that Bernie Sanders, if he could run again, and the only reason he probably can is because of his age, would win. And he almost won in 2020. And had he won, I think we'd be in a very different situation. Of course, I co-chaired his campaign because I believe that not only could he win, he would have defeated Donald Trump, and then we would have been set for a new progressive era. So I think because of the work he's done, we're in a situation that we can finally have that change. This is sort of Bernie Sanders unplugged, but a lot of these thoughts he was sharing in private with many of us who were in the House colleagues. He was very, very frustrated during Harris's campaign, but he was a team player. He bit his tongue. He and many of us didn't say anything negative during the campaign publicly because we didn't want to hurt her. But this was the sentiment we were feeling, that they just weren't listening. Now I think it's right for him to also support independent candidates. I mean, he's an independent, and I think if there are more independent candidates who are running at the House and Senate level, that's great. I mean, Dan Osborne was a great example. I'd endorsed him. I think they add to the party. I never criticized Cornel West or others for getting into the race. I think that's terrific. And maybe it's going to take that kind of movement to also push the Democratic Party to change. But I'm convinced the party can change. Look, we are the party of FDR. We're the party of Lyndon Johnson. We're the party of Bernie Sanders. So it's certainly doable.
How do you respond to the Matt Iglesias / Ezra Klein type analysis of this election? Because they look at what Bernie says and they go, well, hold on, Bernie, 16 million jobs were created, GDP up 12.6%, income's up nearly 4,000 more than prices, inflation down 2.1%, lowest average unemployment in 50 years. And then they say, well, also take a look at the $1,400 stimulus checks that they did and the project labor agreements that the Biden administration did and the $15 minimum wage for federal contractors and employees and the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill and the PACT Act and NLRB being good. So basically the point that they try to make is, Bernie, they adopted a lot of your ideas and then they lost. So maybe the solution is the opposite of what you're saying. Maybe we need to double down on the Bill Clinton era Democrats and the Obama era Democrats and the neoliberalism. That's what they say. I have my own responses to that I could share, but I'll let you give your response to that.
Well, first of all, look, I think Biden was taking things in a better direction and deserves credit for that. I think he wasn't the best communicator of that. I don't think most people understood all of the things he was doing. He never said, you've been shafted for 50 years also. I mean, it was never in context of blaming the existing system. He had some good policies, but he never gave voice to the anger. And I don't think he conveyed to people every day he was trying to solve this. And then he didn't take on enough fights for the non-increase of the minimum wage, for not getting a family leave passed. I mean, he just kind of said, okay, then we'll move on. So my view is that what it shows is people want more sweeping change. What they want, they more want more fight for that sweeping change. They want more of a focus on the economy. I don't think anyone would say the Biden presidency was fundamentally about economics, or that Biden's highest priority was tackling inequality in America. I think they'd say he was trying to stabilize America after Trump. He was concerned about NATO and Ukraine. He was concerned about the foreign policy. I don't think his focus was that in the way FDR's was. So, there are a number of reasons that we lost, but what I would say is Biden wasn't enough in either communication or in terms of a sweeping economic reform agenda.
Yeah, to me, the way I respond to those types is, look, if there's one thing Trump has, it's a narrative that he hammers home all day, every day. He's the protagonist in this grand story where he says the people on my team are the good guys and the people on the other team are the bad guys. And it's always scapegoating the immigrants and trans people and Hollywood and Democratic elites and saying these are the people responsible for your life sucking. Whereas on the Democratic side, the sense I get is they're technocratic status quo managers where they'll do the tweaks around the edges and they'll hand you a sheet of paper and say, look, the GDP went up. You should be kind of happy. And that's not persuasive. It's not a story. It's not a narrative. It's not you're the protagonist and I'm the protagonist and we're fighting back against these evil forces of billionaires and big money donors who have bought our government, and now it represents them and it doesn't represent working people. And that's what Bernie had that others don't have on the Democratic side generally, this grand narrative of like, it's all about the corruption, it's all about the big money interests. But let me ask you this. What about the sort of controversial celebrity angle to this? Because I've pointed that out after Trump won, that perhaps a big portion of this that nobody really thinks about or talks about anymore because it's almost too obvious is that one of the reasons Trump has been so successful economically is he's like one of the most recognizable names on the planet, and he's this celebrity who's really controversial and charismatic, and that just wasn't mirrored by Kamala Harris. She's much less well known, she's not as charismatic, she's certainly not nearly as controversial. So what do you make of that angle of it, just the like human psychology basic thing of like, I know that guy, he's kind of fun to watch, and that may have actually driven some people to vote?
Undeniably, that was part of the reason. That's why Donald Trump was a hard person to beat. And maybe Michelle Obama would have been able to beat him because she probably was the only person who had that kind of star power. And I'm convinced that Kamala Harris would have defeated, even with all her flaws, J.D. Vance. The good news is that next time we're going to be up against someone like J.D. Vance or DeSantis or Tulsi Gabbard or Vivek Ramaswamy or Nikki Haley. There's no Donald Trump in the picture. And I think Donald Trump is a uniquely formidable candidate for that sense. Now, do I think, though, there could be a reaction against it, too? In American politics, we tend to vote for the opposite. And so we voted for the loud, comedic, stand-up guy. My guess is that at the end of this, we may want the substance. I mean, I think that we tend to go from one extreme to the other. And when like people see that their Medicare premiums are probably going to go up because Biden administration is going to have Ozempic and other things be covered by Medicare without having price negotiations. Those Medicare premium hikes are probably going to start out right with Trump. And let's see how Trump handles really economic issues and whether he actually gets people to feel better off. And my sense is that it's a hard thing because his policies just aren't there.
What is your view of this theory that's being floated that Trump is almost like a Republican version of Obama, in that, you know, Obama was able to put together this Obama coalition that worked very well for him to get elected and reelected, and no one since then has really been able to put it back together. And one of the commonalities that you have between Obama and Trump is in both instances you had a significant number of voters who voted for them at the top of the ticket and no one else. And you saw that with Trump. That's why a number of Democratic Senate candidates were able to get across the finish line in swing states. And you also see it in the fact that, as you're pointing out, you know, the successors, the other people who have tried to do Trumpism, like, they just aren't as successful at being able to pull it off.
Ask Mark Robinson.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think that he is this sort of like unique figure? Or do you think that it's possible other Republicans could also pull together these, you know, huge shifts among Latino voters in particular, among young men, et cetera?
I do think from an electoral point of view, he's unique. I mean, he's no Barack Obama. That Barack Obama, despite places where people may disagree, had a substantive vision of leading America in a much better place, and I think actually believed in things beyond himself. And I think Trump, it's all showmanship and an electoral calculus. But I have no doubt that J.D. Vance and DeSantis and these others can match his comedy or his ability to inspire people in the way that he has. And that's why, I really truly believe that Kamala Harris would have beaten certainly Vance and probably DeSantis, and how DeSantis turned out on the campaign stump. And I don't think it's been irrational for the Republicans to keep nominating Trump because he has this added dimension. The good news for the Democratic Party is that Trump is not going to be on the ballot in 2028. So another reason our like end democracy didn't work. Maybe I'll be wrong, but my guess is there are going to be 20 people in New Hampshire and on the Republican side and Democratic side in 1 year, and Trump's going to be a lame duck. And we're going to have an election, and it's a very winnable election for the Democratic Party because it's not going to be against Donald Trump.
Do you think that the surprising people who came out and said maybe Bernie has a point, people like Jen Psaki and James Carville and David Brooks and some of the Pod Save America guys, do you think they will continue to sing that tune, or will they sort of revert back and pretend like they never said that, never believed that?
I think they'll continue to sing it, but the question is, well, are you going to be for the policy, right? I mean, I love Chris Murphy. I respect him, but like, okay, does this mean you're now going to get on Medicare for all and free public college and taxing wealth? And, you know, it's not like, okay, I'm going to now say neoliberalism is bad, but still not be on Medicare for all, still not be on free college, still not be on taxing wealth, or I'm going to get on those positions as Dean Phillips said, who I like, a week before I run, right? I think there is a credibility of, okay, I'm glad you like David Brooks, that we're going to tackle inequality. Wonderful. Are you fine now with the wealth tax? Are you fine with making sure that workers are on boards? Are you fine with making sure workers get a fair share of their profits by making sure that the machinists and UAW workers actually are getting stock with pay for performance? Are you fine with financing from federal government like we did in the New Deal to have massive reindustrialization? So I guess what I'm looking for, I'm glad people are shifting. And certainly it's less lonely than when I was co-chairing Bernie's campaign. A lot of these people were endorsing all the other candidates. But are they going to shift on policy? And, you know, I think after this age of Trumpism, of sloganeering and marketing, and he's a marketing genius, there is going to be a reckoning with, what about the actual policy? Not in like, I want a 5-point plan, but in, are you actually willing to tackle the financial interests and restructure the economy and have transformative change in a way that helps me?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a critical point. Another piece in this battle that's going to be important is the choice of DNC chair. I know David Axelrod had floated Rahm Emanuel, who was, you know, famous for picking these very like corporate-friendly centrist candidates. He shows up at the scene of the crime of all sorts of Democratic ills from, you know, the Clinton era NAFTA, and then he was in there with Obama trying to keep Obama from actually doing healthcare reform. Thankfully, the president didn't listen to him on that front. But, you know, there's a lot of key things that the DNC could do differently. It would be difficult to get money out of politics, probably require a constitutional amendment. But there's nothing to keep the party from banning super PACs from playing inside of party primaries, which would, you know, mitigate the influence of some of these big money groups that, like AIPAC, that are backed by a lot of Republicans and have been extraordinarily influential in terms of the Democratic primary process.
Absolutely. We should ban super PACs in Democratic primaries, and the DNC chair could do that. The DNC chair could make sure that we're not losing registrations like we have been in most of these swing states, Pennsylvania, Arizona, North Carolina, 3 years before we got to the presidential election. DNC chair could make sure we have a 50-state strategy. DNC chair could make sure that we don't rig the calendar of a nominating contest in a way that would advantage a particular candidate or a particular wing of the party. These are the things that the DNC chair should look like. And, you know, you've got Ken Martin, you've got Ben Wickler, you've got others who I think will emerge. People get float names. I mean, people float my name for Speaker of the House. I'm not going to be Speaker of the House. So just because someone's floating Rahm Emanuel doesn't mean that Rahm Emanuel is, you know, going to win a DNC race.
What do you make of the reaction this time around to Trump winning in terms of the will to fight? Because in 2016, when Hillary lost, there was quite a bit of resistance, but, you know, I would argue the way in which that resistance was carried out was maybe counterproductive in some instances, like Russiagate and things of that nature. But I almost get the sense this time around that that will to resist is not there, where, you know, I might actually look back longingly on the 2016 era where there was sort of a unified resistance in some respects. You see this happening now with Morning Joe at MSNBC and, you know, their woes, and with other characters where it looks like, you know, Bill Maher had a monologue where he kind of said a similar thing, where it's like pre-capitulation, where, okay, all right, you won a second time, therefore now I guess I'll look for some common ground with you. You see this among Democrats who are trying to work with the Trump administration now to potentially crack down on pro-Palestine protesters. What do you make of the will to fight? Is there still a will to resist? Or in the Democratic caucus, do they feel like, well, we got our butts whooped, so now I guess the public wants us to sort of find areas of common ground and work with the Trump administration wherever we can?
I think there's still areas of resistance, but it can't be a blanket resistance. It can't be like, okay, we're going to just resist everything, because that would look tone deaf. And I think there was no introspection after 2016, or very little introspection of what we needed to do better. And I'm glad that there's 6 months of people saying, let's go on listening sessions and see where we didn't connect and not just reflexively oppose everything. But there are going to be places where we do have to be very, very unified and strong in opposition. If there starts to be a actual mass deportation where the military is asking for papers at people's employment places, that's going to violate the rights not just of the undocumented, but also of Americans. And it's a very concerning thought. And there should be a mobilization to protect American rights. There should be a mobilization to protect against the repeal of environmental regulations. There should be mobilization to make sure that we're standing up for people who are trans and LGBT and and their freedoms. There needs to be mobilization against retribution and polarization of the Justice Department. So, but he hasn't even assumed the presidency. I get your point that there were marches in 2017 before he even assumed office. But my view is now we're going to need strategic resistance in places that demand it without blanket resistance.
So the problem is I can't think of one policy these days that he's serious about where it actually makes sense to work with him. And when I look at the right, what I see every time a Democrat wins is the right all fall in line, and they are ruthless and they are relentless in saying, no, not these people. They're illegitimate. They're wrong about everything. And I see the opposite now on the Democratic side. I mean, to give one example where it would theoretically make sense to work with him, the Bernie Sanders thing, where he said, if the president's serious about capping credit card interest rates at 10%, I'll be there to work with him on that. But I think what Bernie was doing there was more calling Trump's bluff, knowing because of his track record, he's never going to do that. So it's more exposing Trump as the fraud that he is. I literally, you know, in 2016, I think it was a different story. Maybe you could find some areas if Trump was serious about his rhetoric where you could work with him in 10% of the cases. But this time around, Congressman, I literally can't think of one thing where he's right and where he's actually serious about making a difference, because we have that track record from the first time in office. We know he's a warmonger. We know he's a corrupt billionaire. We know he's going to cut taxes for the rich. We know he's going to deregulate. We know he's going to get rid of the environmental protections. We know all the things he's going to do, and all of them are bad. So my point is, I think now people actually genuinely, sincerely want, among the grassroots, they really want almost an even stronger resistance, but the sense we're getting from the powers that be is actually the opposite, that like, yeah, well, let's try to find some areas to work with him. And it's like, the Republicans just won by being super obstructionist. Why can't we copy the same thing on our side and point out, like, no, that doesn't mean this guy needs to be taken more seriously now. He was still talking about, you know, being an authoritarian, wanting to terminate the Constitution, 91 criminal charges, deploy the military against, you know, the enemy within. Like, there's more of a thirst for resistance now, and there's less of a will for it, and that's what scares me.
That's well said. I mean, look, I think there are other places where we could call it his bluff or look at seeing if he's actually going to deliver. I mean, it's not just a 10% cap on the interest rates. It could be defense spending. If they're talking about this DOGE saying we're going to go after the 5 prime contractors and actually reduce defense spending. Fine. I've been voting against that bloated defense budget for 7-8 years. But I'm skeptical once they come out with the recommendations that Trump or the Republicans in Congress are actually going to go for it. They're talking about, let's have aspects of the PRO Act or aspects of increasing the minimum wage. So we should say, like, okay, let's do these agenda. You want to end offshoring of companies? Why don't we have a 21% tax rate for the companies that are going to Mexico with their factories, as opposed to letting them get 10% tax rates there? So that we say, here's the Trump agenda on keeping factories here and helping the working class. Here's what we're willing to do. And then say Trump's betraying those promises, because his rhetoric on some of this stuff of against offshoring, bringing manufacturing back capping interest rates is has gotten people to vote for him. And we do have to pierce that bubble to say, no, he's not living up to that. But on the broader resistance, I think where there would be capitulation is if we start to capitulate on our values, start to abandon our commitment to trans rights, to LGBT rights, to building an inclusive America that's multiracial. And you've seen some Democrats go that way, and that I think is very dangerous. Or if we just watch passively as he violates the rights of those who are immigrants or the most vulnerable, or starts to take away environmental regulations. I remind people all the time, and I have in my caucus, that Joe Biden was winning by 15 points on immigration when he ran against Donald Trump. People may want a secure border, but they don't want the cruelty in excess of where Trump's policy is going to be. And we do need to make sure that we aren't abandoning some of our core values.
Even on DOGE, though, it seems to me like the key point there is not like, oh, they claim they're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse at the Pentagon. It's why does the richest man on the planet have, who is, by the way, one of the largest Pentagon subcontractors, getting billions in taxpayer dollars in subsidies, why does he have any say in this whatsoever?
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's the part that, like, drives me insane is are we really going to pretend that Elon Musk, who is being investigated by the DOJ and whose companies have run afoul of, allegedly, of labor law and environmental regulations, and as I just said, has massive, to the tune of billions of dollars, financial interest in the federal government, like, we're really going to pretend like he's going to be some honest broker and just rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse here?
Well, look, Congress is going to have the final say, and let's see what.
Well, I'm not sure that's right, Ro. I'm not sure that's right, because the Trump administration believes that, based on some 1976 Budget Act, whatever, that they are not obligated to spend the money that Congress appropriates, meaning that they can do unilateral across-the-board cuts without having to go through Congress. Now, that will have to go through the judiciary, but they've got a pretty friendly Supreme Court that I could very easily see siding with them and saying, yes, you actually are allowed to make these unilateral cuts because although Congress, yes, has the power of the purse, the power to appropriate, you are not obligated to spend all of those funds. So I'm not sure that they do have to go through Congress for this.
We'll see if they win on that. As a practical matter, I think if the House Armed Services Committee is still allocating money and they can't convince them to make those cuts, I think it's very hard to see them, at least on the military budget, cutting those things. But, you know, the tragedy with Musk, in my view, is that he should have been what FDR called a dollar a year man, or it was gendered back then. I have no problem with people who are industrialists coming in to help government to build things if they are open to working with labor unions and there's labor neutrality, and open to government actually setting the rules instead of coming in to dismantle government. And what we should have done is had a vision for reindustrialization and economic renewal that said we're going to get a whole of society approach to do it and win that argument like FDR did, instead of having business leaders come in to dismantle government. And that's why we've got what I call a new economic deal modeled on FDR. We need an economic renewal plan around this country. And we are going to, in my view, need business leaders to build the factories and do things that are going to bring economic growth and dynamism in places. But it's got to be done in collaboration with unions and the government setting rules for everyone.
Yeah, and I would say, despite everything being horrible, in this chaos, hope emerges, because it'll be close to rock bottom, if not outright rock bottom, if they implement even 15% of the things that they say they want to do. And now is the opportunity. Like, you know, I said this the other day, that the agenda is there for the taking, that I think could have the potential to FDR-style crush the Republicans going into the future. We should have Democrats
out. What's the secret, Kyle? I'll tell you. Secret right now.
I'll lay it out for you right now. So first of all, we have to think bigger, right? Like, I genuinely give Biden credit for the CHIPS Act and the PACT Act and the infrastructure bill. I think those things are good, and credit where credit is due on that front. But we're not thinking big enough. The real thing to do, and this is sort of the left-wing version of the Trump Make America Great Again. They say Make America Great Again, implying it was wonderful in the past at some point, perfect in the past. We need to be saying, we don't just want to improve our infrastructure. We want to have the #1 infrastructure in the world. We want to have infrastructure that's better than any other country. We used to think big like this. Let's do high-speed rail all over the place. Let's get state-of-the-art airports that everybody looks forward to going to the airports to go somewhere because you're seeing, you know, amazing things. There's that, I don't know where the airport is, but there's a beautiful like waterfall in the middle of the airport. It's amazing. But this is how we should be thinking. End the corruption, clean elections, end the wars, universal health care, higher minimum wage. Another one which, for the life of me, I don't understand why Democrats haven't run with this one, because from my perspective, I see literally no downsides. You don't even piss off the corporations when you do this. 4-day work week. They've done studies on this, and even the bosses, even the owners say, yeah, our people are relaxed and more happy, and they're just as productive, if not more productive, and they're working 1 day less per week. I mean, this is something we could clobber them with. Eliminate medical debt, Social Security for all, which is just a reframing of universal basic income. Now is the time to, like, have these real big conversations, because clearly Trump yet again shattered the mold of politics that everybody thought existed. He broke every rule in the book and won again. He was talking about Arnold Palmer's dick. He was saying, deploy the military against my political enemies, running on vengeance and authoritarianism. I mean, I certainly didn't think he was going to win, because I just thought he was so far out there and so far gone that there's no way. But it turns out people liked the vibe of revolutionary change, even if that change was bad. So we need to give actual revolutionary change from a left-wing perspective, which makes people feel like these guys are breaking the mold and they're thinking ahead and they actually want to improve the country in a way that is very clear. So I think that's the way out.
I agree with you completely. I think it's about a revolutionary change that gets people to be inspired again. I mean, people say, well, why can't you have an economic revival and renaissance and dynamism across America? People say, well, there are hundreds of these towns that are hollowed out and so much that has been offshored and towns with closed storefronts. But, you know, we're the wealthiest country in the world. We're sitting on $12 trillion in my district. Of course, America can renew new industries and new economy and new downtowns across this country. Of course, we can make sure people have a living wage. Of course, we can make sure workers get a share of profits. Of course, we can make sure we expand Medicare for all and give people universal health care and tax wealth. Of course, we can make sure we get rid of medical debt and increase Social Security benefits. I mean, we need an inspiring vision. And I think when Trump says 60% tariffs, people are saying, okay, he's pushing for radical change, even though I don't agree with it. In our case, it's substantive. And the reason I call it a new economic deal is to remind people that there was a president who did it and he had 4 terms. I mean, it's not rocket science, and we do it in a modern way. Western Pennsylvania produced more steel at one point in this country than Japan and Germany combined. There's a hunger for that kind of ambition in America, and hearkening that kind of energy and ambition. And I am convinced that is the platform that will win, and it's got to be substantive. I don't think it's going to be, my own view, just enough to have marketing and humor and all of the stuff Trump had. I think people, after all of this 12 years of Trump being on the national stage, basically, are going to say, okay, we want radical change. We keep voting for it. We haven't gotten it. Give us the real deal. And the real deal is, frankly, a version of sort of a modern version of FDR and Bernie that's actually going to change the lives of people, and they're going to make this country. Like, I don't understand why we can't say we want to be the top producer of the world. We haven't had a trade surplus since 1975. The next president, by the end of his 8 years, will make sure that we have a trade surplus in America again. Why didn't Joe Biden say that? Like, we're going to produce things again in this country. And we're so, when I told the president, let's go put up steel plants, he said, well, Larry Summers says that steel only gives 83,000 jobs. I mean, come on. Like, it's about more than that. Wow. It's about America leading. It's about America producing. And capturing that sense. So we're in violent agreement there, Kyle.
Well, we did finally beat Medicare, though. So there was that. Congressman, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the media landscape. As a former MSNBC host myself, I've been watching with great interest as the ratings have plummeted. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, their entire worldview has kind of crumbled. Because not only is the MSNBC universe, of course, centered on like resistance to Trump, or it was centered on resistance to Trump. Joe and Mika kind of killed that with their little, trick to Mar-a-Lago. But it was also predicated on this one certain view of how to defeat Trumpism. And, it was basically like the Liz Cheney model, the never Trumpism model, where any sort of issue focus was a distraction from the primary goal. The coalition needed to be, affluent suburbanites and former Trump Republicans. There was obviously a concerted effort in both 2016 and 2020 to make sure that Bernie Sanders could never be the nominee for the party. This was all done purportedly in the name of electability and defeating Donald Trump. And that whole model for how you win and end Trumpism obviously has just been completely repudiated. So I want to get your thoughts on that in general, but I'm also just curious, as someone who was campaign co-chair for Bernie Sanders, how important MSNBC was for blocking Bernie and coalescing support, at the last minute behind Joe Biden in order to defeat a surging, and at that point it appeared almost inevitable, Bernie Sanders in 2020.
It was a huge impediment. I mean, MSNBC was the gatekeepers of the 2020 primary. You needed the validation at the time from the Rachel Maddow's, and the amount of time they went on MSNBC, and Chris Matthews or James Carville or others would be saying Bernie's not electable and we're going to give up the election is too numerous to count. I am convinced that it's one reason that he didn't become president, because while Bernie broke through on the policies and people voted for Medicare for all, and the exit polls showed that they supported single-payer health care, even in states that Biden was carrying, like Mississippi, 80-20, he did not break through. We did not break through on electability. And that's how that MSNBC wing basically killed the candidacy. And they're usually the ones who anoint the candidates. They start, these are the electable candidates, the sort of establishment governors, and then they create a sense of inevitability around it because they're the ones who are anointing them. And more than the DNC, it's really the propaganda from what electability is coming from the TV pundits that has inhibited progressives from rising. Now I think it's totally changed. I mean, the reality is that there are a lot of podcasts that get me more viewership than when I go on and MSNBC. I think progressives should still go on. I think they should keep making the case. But there are two factors that have happened. MSNBC is no longer in any way the MSNBC it was in 2020. And the MSNBC hosts themselves have been humbled. I think it's important to realize that the establishment is 1 for 3. They lost with Hillary. They lost with Biden. He was knocked out. And they lost with Kamala Harris. So 3 losses, 1 win barely in 2020.
Yeah, I'm curious what's going to happen moving forward. Crystal and I have been talking a lot about this, but it appears like there's a lot of MSNBC refugees who are flocking to the online world now. We've seen numbers go up. We just interviewed Steve Schmidt last week about, everything that happened with Morning Joe and how they genuflected at the altar of Trump, and he was very, very vicious and angry at them for basically being fraudulent. And
what about him? Wasn't he like the Romney guy, Steve Schmidt? Or
he was a Republican.
No, you're right.
He's horrible. He attacked Bernie more than anyone. I mean, he's like the biggest opportunist there is. Now he's going to your show or something. I remember him attacking Bernie, but maybe I should bury the hatchet.
Oh, I have no doubt that he attacked Bernie.
Well,
no, I mean, he's an ideological conservative. For sure.
What I'm surprised by is that he's going after the people who butter his bread. He was a regular on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, and he sees them go kneel at the altar of Trump, and now he's going against them very hard and basically saying, you guys are frauds, you guys are con men, because there is from like an old school conservative perspective, there is an argument particularly around Trump's authoritarianism, where he's like, no, I actually do believe in the Constitution. I actually do believe in limited government. I see this guy, and he's talking about jailing his political opponents. I think he has a real, genuine ideological break with that, and he's disturbed by that. And now he sees supposedly liberal hosts, again, Joe is a former Republican, but supposedly liberal hosts who, like that, decided, okay, we're going to go along with them. And they really have nuked their own follower base. It's literally 40% is what they lost in their audience. Wow. Just in the same show from when they started it.
Right.
Go ahead, Crystal.
And you know this, bro, I would assume, in a morning show, the ratings are supposed to build as people wake up, right? So you have fewer people watching at 6 a.m. than are watching at 7 a.m., at 8 a.m. So after they made their little like, oh, we went and made nice with Donald Trump, yeah, their ratings in the next hour dropped 40%. And, we were looking at some of the comments in Kyle's comment section after we posted a portion of
No, you were looking at the
interview.
comments, not me.
I was looking at some of the comments.
I don't read comments.
And they were like, I watch Morning Joe every day for 8 years and I will never watch them again. Like, I think that I genuinely do think that they nuked their credibility, and because they were so prominent, the entire network. And if that network is not about resistance to Trump, like, what is it for?
That's right. And now MSNBC is being, what's it called again? It's a spinoff now?
Spinoff, yeah.
So now they're going to basically be sort of independent, kind of, which is like,
and not
okay,
have NBC
how are you gonna sink or
journalistic
swim?
resources. So.
There's a reason I'm an early adopter. Don't forget me.
Yes, you are.
Oh, yeah, no.
So I think the future is going to be shows like yours, podcasts. I mean, obviously, people should go on everything. And but the message that I think people find the most discordant is that people were yelling on MSNBC that democracy was going to end, and now they've gone to, okay, now let's talk about the midterms and winning the midterms. And
and let's find common ground with Hitler.
They exaggerated on the first time, and the American people didn't believe it. They thought, like, yeah, we're still going to have 2026 and 2028 elections. And then they quickly pivoted now to not even resisting the policies. And I think it's all over the place. It's going to hurt the credibility. But the good news is that I think voices like yours, and I know this. I mean, I've said when I come on podcasts like this, when I go on breaking points, when I hear things that secular Kulinski, I mean, are doing. I hear that on the ground. I hear people saying that, and so that's going to make democracy a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, a lot more possible to have an ambitious agenda emerge, even if it's not what I'm saying or Kyle's saying. Because when you have a free flow of ideas and conversation, you're not stuck on what I call the ChatGPT generated talking points, which is what a lot of the Harris campaign was. It was okay, let's do a analysis. Oh, this polls well. We're going to be for home care workers, for the elderly. I love that policy. I told people it polls well when Bernie Sanders was proposing. It was the most popular thing. No one's going to make you leader of the free world to give home care workers to their parents. Like that's not like why you run for president. And it's just was the dumbest thing the way they were running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've got a busy schedule, so I want to let you go, but we do, appreciate your willingness to engage and that you've been here forever. I hope you encourage your colleagues because we would love to speak with them as well. And, I mean, I'm pretty, I guess, jaded. Like, I think most likely what's going to happen is everything is going to get worse. But I do think, like you said, Ro, that there's a possibility now that didn't exist before. And so, there's an opening for people like yourself and shows like these to try to seize the moment.
I don't want to end on a downer note, but I've really soured on many an independent media. I basically think they're fake independent media. They have the same sort of malincentives as they do in mainstream media,
Worse,
and there's
actually.
audience capture. There's all these problems with it. But I think what people are looking for this time around vis-a-vis Trump is they want resistance, but they want it to be intelligent resistance, and they also want a counter vision. And that's what I think it's super important to provide. So I'm happy you're going out there, and I'm happy you're making the case. Make sure that you keep exposing the frauds. Don't go along with any colleagues who want to hold Trump's hand now and, hey, we'll find areas to work together. Trump doesn't mean it. We have his first 4 years. It was horrible. He did virtually nothing good. So let's remember that moving forward. And I'm sure you'll continue to build your own narrative and make your own argument and try to get more people to the Democratic brand and improve the Democratic brand. And for that, we appreciate it.
Yeah, and good on you for not just throwing trans people under the bus, for standing up for basic rights and equality, because that was such an easy sort of cheap shot for people to take that doesn't challenge a single corporate donor or PAC whatsoever.
Even Trump in 2015 and 2016, he said, Caitlyn Jenner can use whatever bathroom she likes. I don't care. And now all of a sudden, it's the exact opposite, and everybody's virtue signaling about how horrible trans people are. The idea that this new trans congresswoman, is some sort of a threat to Nancy Mace? Nancy Mace doesn't believe that. It's totally cynical and shameless, and we have to call it out.
Couldn't agree more. That's why if you look at the clip, I did, but I love the idea of intelligence, resistance, and a countervision. And Crystal, thank you also. And I'll encourage my colleagues from getting on these podcasts. It's in their own interest. I've said this in Progressive Caucus meetings again and again. And I said, don't look at all the comments. Like even the comments, if they're 60-40 against you, as sometimes happens when I go to podcasts, people remember that you went on and that you took a position and that you stuck to it. So I am hopeful that we're finally going to go through a change in this party and that something good is going to emerge. Because I do think Donald Trump is ironically smashed the establishments of both parties and opened it up for a new politics.
Could be. Could be. All right, Congressman, great to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
All right, so that's Ro Khanna there. I mean, Chris Murphy is sort of now showing how not to do it, because he started out by saying the right things, like, oh, Bernie's right to call out the billionaires and the donors and the corporations.
Well, he said something really good, too, which is, you know what? Turns out our opposition to Bernie was more about, like, our donors and about our high-income base than it is about...
But then he goes on to say, we need a bigger tent. And by that, what we learned he meant is anti-trans people, stuff like that. Yeah. And then you saw the other day what he said. Like, these democratic policies of, like, expanding Medicaid and this and that, people didn't seem to like it. They don't want a handout. And in that same tweet, he was like, we need to break from neoliberalism. You're advocating the most neoliberal shit in the world if you're arguing against social safety net programs. Yeah. So everybody's brain is sort of scrambled right now, and it's a real opportunity, but the way he went about it is not right.
Chris Murphy.
Chris Murphy is not right. Ro Khanna did not throw trans people under the bus, which I'm telling you, unfortunately, it might be a rare thing. Yeah. It might be a rare thing because we already saw the Labour Party in the UK, for example. They're to the left of the Democrats on many issues, but they're worse on trans rights. Yeah. It became... an issue for them where they ran to the right to catch up with the conservatives.
Well, let me give an example that's not Bernie Sanders. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, elected and reelected, and he, he's not Bernie, right? He's not as lefty as Bernie is, but I'm very familiar with his first campaign, which he ran coming out of the teacher strike and really was aggressively like pro-jobs, pro-union, pro-good wages, opposed to these attacks on teachers' pensions in particular, gets elected. And then because the legislature in Kentucky is super Republican, they were passing all this terrible anti-trans crap. And he vetoed it. And he explained it. Like, no, I believe all children of God. You can disagree with me if you want, but I'm not going to go forward with this. And guess what? He got reelected. So if you hold those issues in the state of Kentucky, I guarantee you it would be a catastrophe for like a pro-equality position. But because people felt like, okay, I might not agree with him on that, but you know what? This man has brought jobs to my community, and I feel like he's fighting for affordable health care and things that are super tangible for me. They were like, whatever about that, because I know that's not, I know his focus and priority is on making things better for my life, and he didn't run and hide on those issues. He was quite out front, and I applaud him for that.
Yeah, and also, like, just make the argument, man. Like, what do you actually think about trans people? I'm cool with trans people. I like trans people. When I look at that situation, I feel like this isn't easy for them. You think it's easy? You think they wanted this? No, I'm sure it was a rough and difficult personal journey where you had to go to therapy and you had to talk to your parents and you had to figure out what was going on and maybe you got treatment, and it's not easy. And they're treated this like whatever it is, 0.001% of the population is treated like they got the boot on the neck of others when it's probably really hard to even get a fucking job as a trans person. And you got all these fucking assholes scapegoating them. Make the argument. You are wrong to scapegoat them. This is no different than the anti-gay sentiment from not that long ago. Yeah. And why are we on the defense on cultural stuff? Like I say all the time, in 2022, Republicans voted against the right to gay marriage. In 2022, this was a settled issue as of like 2010, or at least it was supposed to be as of like 2010. But you have, I think it was 36 in the House and 36 in the Senate, 169 in the House that Republicans have voted against it. That's fucking extremism. Yeah. That's extremism. And if you can't beat them when they're the extreme ones, it's like you suck at arguing, you suck at messaging, you suck at building your narrative.
And they're so afraid of their own shadow.
Because they really don't care. Like, they don't care. They like their power. They like their prestige. They like being, in the halls of power, but ultimately what got them there, to them it's kind of irrelevant, right? It's like he brought up Dean Phillips. He's a perfect example of like, I will say the thing I think you want to hear. And it's like, that's what you shouldn't be doing. You should be saying what you actually think and actually standing for something, which is unfortunately not the case with many of them.
Yeah, it was just so gross to me that Democrats ran this very total establishment campaign, got their asses kicked because they're listening to, like, you know, the donor class and the billionaires, and even buried their own like price gouging ad because it was Wall Street was like, oh, I don't know if I like this. You did that, and then you have the first instinct from, you know, at least 2 members of Congress, but a lot of the commentary or whatever is to be like, well, kind of fuck trans people. It's like, what is wrong with? I mean, I just think that to me, it displays such a lack of character and integrity. Like, this is a group of people who are truly like vulnerable. If you look at the health outcomes, if you look at the suicide rates, if you look at all of these things, and you know that's where you go when they just ran a multi-billion-dollar campaign and like flushed that money down the toilet, and you think the problem is like that trans people exist. I don't know. It's just, to me, like, it's such a moral failure.
What did you want? What did you want to run an ad being like, I think my opponent is right about trans people? What's your solution?
Exactly. I mean, that's the other, and that's what's so convenient about it, and what grosses me out about it. Like, one of the things that's so grotesque about it to me is like, what does this even indicate that the Democratic Party should do? Because they already don't stand up for trans people. Like, that's already happened. In fact, you did have some candidates who ran those ads.
Well, Biden actually did, but in the past, Biden did stand up for trans people. But
no more.
I hope that doesn't change. Like, I hope the party doesn't, you know.
It probably will. I mean, that's why, like, not to be too grim, I think it's very likely that things get worse. Like, I think that's the most likely trajectory that we're on, is that, like, things get worse, and out of the destruction of MSNBC and the destruction of the establishment Democratic Party, you just get like a more fascist Democratic Party and a worse, you know, media ecosystem. But there is a possibility for something that to grow in its place that is better, and so that's just what we have to fight for. I think it's a long shot.
I think, maybe to talk you off the ledge a little bit, I think these waves matter, right? Like the Bernie wave in 2016 and 2020, that mattered in terms of shaping the direction of the Democratic Party, and how we got Build Back Better was this close to getting through. You know what I'm saying? Like, that actually mattered. The Trump waves online in 2016 and 2024, that mattered. Like, it mattered. Like, where the people are, where the energy is, that genuinely and sincerely matters. So the point is taking that energy, taking that wave, taking people's reactions, and harnessing it in the proper direction for the proper outcomes, right? And so maybe, like, I agree with you that left to its own devices, the blob will move in the wrong direction, very likely. But that doesn't mean that the energy is there. That doesn't mean that the population is there. That doesn't mean that, you know, the wave isn't trying to push back in the other direction and genuinely sort of shift in a better direction. So I'm not necessarily as doomer as you are on it, because I'm in black pill mode, but part of black pill mode is I'm not stopping. I'm going. I'm guns blazing in every which direction to try to move us in the right direction.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, because
I'm also trying to be realistic about what's likely to unfold.
Well, I have no expectations. I'm doing it for the sake of what's right and for the sake of saying what's true. Right? That's what you do. And wherever you end up, you end up. But you can't say you didn't go down guns blazing. You know what I'm saying?
That's all you can do.
So yeah. All right, there you have it, guys. We love y'all. Everybody, do us a big favor. Sign up below on Substack, Crystal Kyle and Friends. We get awesome interviews like this every week. All right, we'll see you soon. Peace.